Maybe some of y'all can relate to this. When I was a kid, about 6 years old, every Friday night at 7 p.m., I was glued to the television set because the Dukes of Hazzard was on. And, it was just two good old boys, never meaning no harm, and I would watch it. And then as soon as it was over, you'd hear this music. And, of course, I lived in northern Michigan, the UP, almost as far away from Texas as you can get. But then I'd hear, dun, 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 bum, bum, dun, dun. And there's this pan shot of this wonderful, beautiful ranch, South Fork Ranch. And then all of a sudden, this helicopter is flying over this stadium that should be a dome, but it's got a hole cut out. And you can see Dallas Cowboys on the field. And then all of a sudden, there are these buildings that look like they're made out of glass. And I lived in the fourth largest town in the UP, which had 11,000 people. I'd never seen a building made out of glass before. And that's what it looked like. And that's what I knew about Texas, okay? We heard that my dad was transferring down here, and I only knew two things about Texas. Number one, the ants here bite you. That didn't happen up north. They were little, they were black, they could crawl on you, they didn't bite you. The second thing was what I knew about the show Dallas. I figured there were glass buildings. I figured that there was a prairie next door with cows walking around and eating. That's what I thought. And for 10 years, I watched that show. And as a kid, I had no clue what they were talking about, but it was interesting. And it would be coming on, bah, 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 and I'd be seeing all this stuff, and it was really cool. And then all of a sudden, there comes Victoria Principal walking across. She's the one that played Pamela Ewing. And I thought, wow. This girl is fine as frog hair. And so I had no clue what was going on in that show, but she was pretty, and it sounded interesting, and I didn't know anything about oil cartels. I still don't. I'm 45 now, have no clue. Jock would always look and go, how about we all drive into Braddock and I'll buy you a drink? Can anyone tell me, is there any town in North Texas called Braddock? I don't think there is. If there is, it's like one bar and the Ewings are hanging out there. And I've been here now over 30 years. But anyways, we came down here to Texas, and it was anything but what I thought it was going to be. Number one, there was actually a winter, and it got quite cold. And it was 110 degrees in the summertime, and that was miserable. Basically, there's like 1 month out of the year where it's tolerable weather. And also my parents, I thought it was going to be country like what I was used to, but my parents had heard that the school district in Plano was a really good one, so they moved us there. And we moved there when there was 80,000 people in Plano, and all these professionals from around the country were moving there, and it was becoming a yuppie kind of place. And pretty soon I was being made fun of because I had simple tastes. Where I came from, most everybody was a blue-collar worker. The clothes I wore, the Yankee accent that I had, everything, even the way I laughed, I didn't have any friends, and I became depressed. And not only that, but I thought I'd done something unforgivable because it got so hard that I started having thoughts that I hated God, and I thought that was the unforgivable sin because I didn't hate God, but I thought these thoughts, and so therefore maybe I couldn't be forgiven. And pretty soon, I was full of anxiety, full of insecurity, full of fears, things that I'd never experienced before, and I kind of fell off into depression. And then I'd look around and I'd see all my Christian friends, and I'd go to church, and I'd go, surely I don't see anybody that feels sad and hopeless like me. Surely they don't have the anxiety that I have. There were times when I literally wanted to kind of crawl up in the fetal position in the corner with a blanket over top of me, and I wanted to fall asleep, and then maybe it was all a bad dream, and I'd wake up, and God would love me, and God would want me, and God would work in my life, and I'd feel fine. And what what I didn't know was that I wasn't all alone. That very often, even those of us in the church can fall into feelings of hopelessness or worthlessness or depression that sometimes goes on weeks at a time. And today, I want us to study someone that, he prayed and the heavens shut up for 3.5 years. He prayed and God made fire rain down from heaven. When Jesus was on earth, He appeared with Jesus at the Transfiguration. He didn't even die the way all of us have to die. God carried Him off the earth alive. And this is Elijah. And I think in 1 Kings chapter 19, if you guys want to turn there, and it's in the New Living Translation today, so I felt like since we were working through a narrative, it might be a little easier to read it that way. So what you see up here on the screen is going to probably be a little different from what's in your Bible. But I think that he came to a point after such intense service with God that he just broke down and fell into a depression. Now, in chapter 19, we'll get there in a minute, but first I kind of want to give a little bit of background and build us up to it. So about 70, 80 years before chapter 19 in 1 Kings, we had a situation where the kingdom of Israel broke in half. And half of it, the kingdom of Judah, went with Rehoboam, that was King Solomon's son. And the other half went with King Jeroboam, who had been a servant of Solomon, who had actually fallen out of favor and kind of exiled himself to Egypt and then came back and became the king. And under these kings' leadership, Israel began to fall into heavy idolatry. And it got worse and worse and worse. And then there was a king over Israel called Omri. And at that point, through different marriages, we started to see the rise of the worship of the god called Baal. And Baal was the storm god. He was the one that was responsible for sending the rain that they so desperately needed for the crops to grow. And the Lord said, basically, that Omri was kind of like Henri, okay? He was like the worst king of them all, and that Ahab, his son, even topped him in evilness. And that's where we are in chapter 19. What has happened is that Ahab has married Jezebel, who's a Baal worshiper, and they are encouraging Israel to worship Baal. Now, Israel at this time has not completely turned their backs on God. They're trying to incorporate that in with what they're doing. And so Elijah was called by God so that he could go out and bring Israel back to worshiping the real God, the God of Israel. And so when Ahab was not repenting, then Elijah prayed, and God caused it not to rain for 3.5 years, which was a direct assault on the worshipers of Baal. Because if Baal is the god that controls rain, and Baal is the storm god, and yet he's so impotent, if he does exist, that he can't make it rain when the prophet of God prays and no rain comes, we see that God is making a direct assault on any kind of worship of Baal. And so now we've gone 3.5 years. There's this severe drought and famine in the land. And Elijah gets a hold of Ahab and he says, hey, call all of Israel together. Let's go over to Mount Carmel. We're going to have a little contest here. And in fact, I want you all to stop wavering between two opinions. If Baal is God, worship him. But if the Lord is God, worship him. So they called together the 850 prophets of Baal. There were 450 that were completely dedicated to the male god Baal, and there were another 400 that were dedicated to his consort, the female version, basically, Asherah. So these 850 prophets came, and Elijah said, here are 2 bulls. You take one, any one you choose one of them. Cut it up, make an altar. I'll take the other one, I'll cut it up, I'll repair the Lord's altar, I'll put this bull on it. You guys pray, and if fire rains down and burns it up, we'll know that Baal exists and Israel can worship him. But if I pray, and the Lord calls down fire and burns up the bull on his altar, then we'll know that the Lord is God and we'll worship him. And everybody was like, hey, yeah, that sounds great. So here they are at Mount Carmel, which looks kind of like our Ozarks or our Smoky Mountains, okay? They're about 1,800 feet tall. They're more like rolling hills. They're wooded. It's beautiful. They're out there. Thousands of people are standing around. There's 2 altars. Here's 850 false prophets of Baal. Here's Elijah alone. And these guys in the morning, they go to chanting. They go to dancing. They go to cutting themselves. They go to praying. And about noon, nothing's happened. So actually Elijah, who had a good sense of humor, starts to go, hey, maybe he's out going to the bathroom. He literally says that in here. And about 3 o'clock, Elijah goes, my turn. About the regular sacrifice time of the day, he repairs the altar and prays, and fire rains down, and it consumes the bull. And he had put 4 gallons of water in a trench around it. All of that evaporated up. And all of Israel went, the Lord, He is God. And he goes, round up those 850 guys. They round them up, they take them down to the valley, and they slaughter all of them and get rid of this ungodly influence in Israel. And then Elijah says to Ahab, get ready. It's about to start raining again. And he goes down and he prays, and the storms come. And that's where we find ourselves. He told Ahab, look, it's going to rain so much that you're not even going to be able to get back home to Jezreel. So you better take off now. And so he did. And it actually says in the latter part of chapter 18 that Elijah, the Lord gave him special strength, and he was able to pick up his garments and run super fast and actually be in front of Ahab's chariot all the way back to Jezreel. And that's where we pick up here in chapter 19. It says, when Ahab got home, he told Jezebel, that's his wife, everything Elijah had done, including the way he had killed all the prophets of Baal. So Jezebel sent this message to Elijah, may the gods strike me and even kill me if by this time tomorrow I have not killed you just as you have killed them. So here they are, they're in the same town, and Jezebel wasn't there. She's hearing this from her husband, Ahab. And Elijah's here in the town, and he has had basically a mountaintop experience where he has experienced the Lord's power, and he is probably on a high. And here's Jezebel basically putting a hit out on his life and knows exactly where he is because she sent a message to him, which is very alarming if you're the one that the hit's been put out on, that they know where you are. But why would Jezebel care so much? I mean, come on. I mean, she's a Baal worshiper. But why would it upset her so? Well, actually, if you look into her background, she is the daughter of the king of Phoenicia, which includes the towns of Tyre and Sidon. And in Tyre, they call this god Baal Machart. And her father's not just the king, he's a priest of Baal Machart. So she gets it honest. This isn't just her religion. Her father is a priest of this religion. And so she was personally feeding and taking care of the needs of those prophets. Those were her friends. That was her religion. And so she feels personally responsible. So she puts out a hit on Elijah's life. And it says in verse 3, Elijah was afraid and fled for his life. He went to Beersheba, a town in Judah. It's actually the southernmost town in Judah. And he left his servant there. Then he went on alone into the wilderness, traveling all day. He sat under a solitary broom tree and prayed that he might die. I've had enough, Lord, he said. Take my life, for I am no better than my ancestors who have already died. Wow. Why is Elijah afraid? I mean, in chapter 17, a couple of chapters back, there was this huge drought, and there was a widow and her son who were about to have their last meal. And Elijah goes, don't be afraid. Because he knew that the Lord would care for them. And he did. And then here he is, and the Lord rains fire down after he's prayed. And she is appealing to her gods. May the gods strike me dead if I don't kill you. And Elijah, through the Lord's power, has already proved that that God isn't even real. Why is he scared? Well, it says right here, when he said to the Lord, I've had enough, Lord. 3.5 years I've been serving you. 3.5 years of mountaintop experiences and then total fear. People after me. And he just broke down. He broke down. I have a friend, maybe some of you know him, his name is Mike Spencer. He was the pastor of a Bible church in West Texas for 16 years. And because of me dealing with depression and other things, we had sat down and he had actually gone through this passage and had talked to me about how maybe what Elijah experienced here was depression. So some of the things that I want to share are some of his ideas on this passage. But even right here, like when someone is facing a depression, the first thing they want to do is isolate themselves. Isolate themselves from the body of Christ. Isolate themselves from their family. Isolate themselves from things that they enjoy and activities they normally engage in. Isolate themselves from their work. And it's a dangerous place if you're depressed to be alone with your thoughts. And we see Elijah here. What's it say? He went down to Beersheba and left his servant there. Well, there's a hit out on his life. It's very possible that he's there just in case he hears any scuttlebutt or anybody comes through there looking for Elijah. Maybe he can go on and find Elijah. But I don't think so, because Elijah travels a full day into the wilderness, and well, you can't see it right now, but it looks like what you all saw, that barren desert wilderness and mountains. How's he going to find Elijah? I think Elijah is broken down and depressed, and he doesn't want to be found. He's isolated himself. And he sits down under this broom tree, which is like a shrub out in the desert that grows to 10 to 12 feet tall. It's got really nice smelling blooms, and it's got small leaves, and it provides just a little bit of shade, and he's under there, and he's obviously not afraid to die because he asks for it. Suicide was something that was repulsive in Israel's society. It's repulsive today. It's horrible. So people didn't normally just kill themselves. They asked the Lord to go ahead and do it for them. And that's what he's asking for. So it can't be that he just fled for his life. He's broken. He's tired. He's weary. It even says in verse 5, then he lay down and slept under the broom tree. People who are depressed want to sleep. But as he was sleeping, an angel touched him and told him, get up and eat. That's one of the things we neglect too when we're depressed. We just don't have an appetite. And he looked around, and there beside his head was some bread baked on hot stones and a jar of water. So he ate and drank, and then he fell back asleep again. He lay down again. So he's discouraged and he's sleeping and he has low energy. And here's the thing, Elijah is out in the middle of nowhere having left the Lord's work. He had a job to do still. He wasn't called out there. And here he is out in the middle of nowhere. And what's so cool is that God knows exactly where he is because he sends an angel to him. He skipped out on the Lord, but the Lord knows where he is. And he's discouraged, and he's not doing the Lord's work, and yet God meets him right there and even provides for his needs by giving him bread and giving him water. Isn't God good? Isn't he so merciful and kind and loving and gentle? We're going to see him become even gentler. In verse 7 it says, "Then the angel of the Lord came again and touched him. 'Get up and eat some more, or the journey ahead will be too much for you.' So he got up and ate and drank, and the food gave him enough strength to travel 40 days and 40 nights to Mount Sinai, the mountain of God. And there he came to a cave where he spent the night." So the crazy thing is from where he is to Mount Sinai or Mount Horeb, the mountain of God, is 200 miles. And if he's traipsing along, he could easily make 15 to 20 miles a day. I don't know if this is true or not, but I'd heard that during the Texas Revolution, that when Sam Houston and his troops needed to get down to where San Jacinto is, the Battle of San Jacinto, that they traveled with all their gear 40 miles a day and made 80-mile trek in 2 days, all those men. So if all he's doing is traveling 15 miles a day, it should only take him 15 or so days to get there. And it takes him 40 days and nights. And I think that's symbolic. Because Moses spent 40 days on that same mountain with God without any food or drink hundreds of years before. And the Lord had sustained him. And the Israelites had wandered in the wilderness for 40 years, and God sustained them. Once again, he shows himself to be a man of God as God sustains him for 40 days and 40 nights. And he comes to the mountain, to a cave where he spends the night. And he had that journey that the Lord had provided him for. And had the Lord not provided nourishment, it would have been too much. Just like when we face depression and discouragement and anxiety. The journey is too much for us. But the Lord provides for us, and one of the main ways that he provides for us and gives us nourishment is by giving us each other, to encourage each other. When I'm down, you're up. And when you're down, I'm up. It's like having God with skin on around us all the time. And then in the second half of verse 9, the Lord just so gently says to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" I mean, after all, the Lord didn't send for him. The Lord didn't say, "Hey, come on out to my mountain. We'll get together, talk a little bit, we'll strategize." No, Elijah had left God's work and come out there. So the Lord just very gently says, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And the Lord is so gentle in that way. When Adam and Eve sinned in the garden and they hid themselves, and in the cool of the day, the Lord is walking through the garden and he calls out, "Where are you?" He knows where they are, but he says, "Where are you?" And then, of course, Adam and Eve go, "Oh, we ate that fruit that you told us not to, and we realized we were naked, and we're embarrassed and ashamed, and we've hidden." And then he even is gentle again. He goes, "Who told you that you were naked?" And then when Cain and Abel offered sacrifices, and Cain's sacrifice was not accepted, and he was upset, and the Lord goes, "Why are you so angry? Why do you look so dejected?" And then later, when Cain killed Abel, the Lord doesn't come up and just beat him. He comes up and goes, "Hey, where's your brother Abel?" It seems to be the Lord's MO to go ahead and come to us and just ask us that question. Elijah, what are you doing here? And in verse 10, Elijah replied, I have zealously served the Lord God Almighty, but the people of Israel have broken their covenant with you, torn down your altars, killed every one of your prophets. I am the only one left, and now they are trying to kill me too. Look at Elijah's focus there. It's totally in the negative. He can't see anything positive right now. And that's how I know that emotionally he's broken. Just a few days before, he prayed and God called down fire. He provided for the needs of that widow. The Lord has been sustaining him in every way and protecting him. He had prayed and the Lord had shut up the heavens, and now he prayed and it has rained torrential floods. But all he can see right now is the negative. Just like us when we're broken down, all we can see is the bad. And we stop looking at God and all we see is our circumstances. I have served the people of Israel, the broken covenant and altars, killing of the prophets. I'm the only one left. They're after me. I mean, he is practically accusing God of unfaithfulness. I've zealously served you, and now they're after me. If he wasn't in despair, it would have been an affront to God for him to be accusatory like that to God. But the Lord is gentle to him. Met him out in the wilderness, in the middle of nowhere, provided for his needs. And when he shows up, the Lord doesn't go, "What? You're supposed to be over there." He goes, "What are you doing here?" So gently. You know, it's funny. Here is Elijah, depressed and discouraged, despondent, focused on the wrong things. The crazy thing is we kind of got the cure for this last week as Chris was going through Philippians 4. In verse 8 and 9 it says, "And now, dear brothers and sisters, one final thing. Fix your thoughts." Literally, make the decision that you will think on these things, on what is true and honorable and right and pure and lovely and admirable. Think about things that are excellent and worthy of praise. Keep putting into practice. There's the second part. Fix your thoughts and put into practice all you learned and received from me. Everything you heard from me and saw me doing, then the peace of God will be with you. And that's the cure for depression. And that's exactly what Elijah is not doing. So the Lord goes in verse 11, "Go out and stand before me on the mountain." And the Lord told him, "Go out and stand before me." And Elijah stood there. The Lord passed by, and a mighty windstorm hit the mountain. It was such a terrible blast that the rocks were torn loose. But the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind, there was an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, there was a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, there was the sound of a gentle whisper. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his cloak and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. And a voice said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" So just like in Exodus 19, when the Lord shows up, the earth responds to it. Fire and earthquake and wind that's so strong it breaks loose the rocks. The Lord has shown up and the earth can't help that. And sometimes the Lord shows up in that amazing way and He's in it. But this time when He showed up, those were just the effects of the earth responding to the Lord's presence. And then literally in the Hebrew, it means a sound of gentle stillness. Do y'all know who Chuck Swindoll is, the preacher Chuck Swindoll? When he was growing up, he grew up near a railroad track. And during World War II, there was this constant rumble along the tracks of trains that were carrying supplies to support the war effort. And all day and all night, the trains went by, and one night, everyone in the house was woken up because there was a few minutes that a train didn't go by. And they were so used to the rumble that the silence was loud and woke all of them up. Isn't that crazy? Well, here we've had an earthquake, wind, fire, and the Lord is not in it. And then the sound of gentle stillness. And Elijah recognized the Lord was in that. And it was like the Lord was saying, I am relentlessly moving on to accomplish my purpose, even if it's subtle and you can't see it happening. Even if it's imperceptible, I am accomplishing my will and I'm doing it relentlessly. Sometimes you just have to listen for the gentle whisper. And he asked Elijah the same question again. What are you doing here? And Elijah's obviously so broken down and despondent that it's hard for him to see. And he replies again, and he says the same things. In verse 14, I've zealously served you. People have broken the covenant, broken down the altars. They've killed every one of your prophets. I'm all alone, basically. Here I am. I'm in a pity party. And the Lord has just revealed himself. And sometimes we are so blinded by our emotions and our depression that we can't see clearly, even when the Lord is right in front of us, revealing himself. And such was the case with me. I think I told you all a couple months ago that when I was 12, because when I was depressed when I was 12 and 14 and 18 and 22 and 30 and 35, and it wasn't until my 40s that I started to come out of this. And the way that I felt was that, you ever see those pictures of Oklahoma and Kansas during the Dust Bowl of the 1930s? They're black and white and the wind, and you can see the dust, and there's like an old broken down fence, and it's cold, and there's nothing out there but maybe tumbleweeds just kind of rolling across the prairies. And every time I just felt dead inside, month after month, year after year. It was kind of like being in Kansas. And you know how Dorothy then goes to Oz and there's all this color? I had color. And then when we moved to Texas, it was like going back to Kansas. And so I tried to call W.A. Criswell on the phone and talk to him. I pigeonholed Henry Blackaby, the writer of Experiencing God, at a conference and asked all my questions. He even held up going on at the same time. At one point, I was a radio announcer at 90.9 KCBI and on Billy Graham's PR team. And through that, I was able to question every major, who's who in Christianity. And I just could not bring myself to trust. I could not bring myself out of this tired, weary state of looking only at my circumstances. And then about 39 or 40, I made the decision that I was going to fix myself, my thoughts on these things. And I was going to teach, and we were going to lead home life groups, and I was going to be active in church in a way that served. So I was fixing my eyes on those things, and then I was serving in a practical manner. And I'm 45, and I still struggle. But I can see the yellow brick road now. I can see the color again. I can understand that all that time that God was breaking me and changing me into something that I could not have been without it. But sometimes, unlike Elijah here, we have to begin now to fix our things, fix our sights on what is lovely and pure, and we have to start doing something. And so that's what the Lord does. In verse 15, then the Lord told him, go back the same way you came. Come on. You're here. I've shown you myself. And that's not enough. Go back the way that you came. And then he gives him some marching orders. When you arrive there, anoint Hazael to be king of Aaron. Anoint Jehu, the grandson of Nimshi. Anoint Elisha, the son of Shaphat from the town of Abel Meholah. So he gives him marching orders, things to do. And then he says something very encouraging, that he has preserved 7,000 others in Israel who have never bowed down to Baal or kissed him. Elijah didn't know that. Elijah thought that he was all alone, because that's what we do. We isolate ourselves. We only see what's in front of us, but we are not alone. If you're here and you're depressed, you are not alone. If you're here and you're experiencing anxiety, you are not alone. If you're here and you read the Bible and you doubt it sometimes, you are not alone. If you're here and you look at this and you don't have it all figured out, that's okay. You are not alone. I'm here. Chris is here. Brian back there is here. Mike is here. We're all here for each other. Let's fix our thoughts on what is lovely and pure and admirable and excellent, and think on these things, and let's start acting. Let's raise godly kids. Let's go back to work and school and do a good job and be witnesses for the Lord there. Let's serve here at church and in the community. In James chapter 5, verse 16, it says, confess your sins to each other and pray for each other so that you may be healed. There's a vulnerability in that. You have to lay yourself bare before others, and you have to be gentle with others who lay themselves bare. So often we want to eat each other up. For the ladies, a lot of times it's gossip and kind of shunning. For the men, we just love to get in there, and when somebody we think has stepped off the path or is discouraged, we love to beat each other up. Because even when we're happy with each other, we're insulting each other. It just gets that much worse when somebody is vulnerable and we got something to pick at them about. But it says to confess your sins. The earnest prayer of a righteous person has great power and produces wonderful results. Elijah was as human as we are, and yet when he prayed earnestly that no rain would fall, none fell for 3.5 years. And then he prayed, and the sky sent down rain, and the earth yielded its crops. Elijah was as human as we are. How do I know that God will deal with you and I in the same way that He dealt with this great figure of the Bible? It's because God is no respecter of persons, and Elijah was just like you and I. This week, Matt Hefner turned me on to a song by Casting Crowns called Stained Glass Masquerade. Has anybody heard that? Listen to the lyrics of this song. Is there anyone that fails? Is there anyone that falls? Am I the only one in church today feeling so small? Because when I take a look around, everybody seems so strong. I know they'll soon discover that I don't belong. So I tuck it all away like everything's okay. If I make them believe it, maybe I'll believe it too. So with a painted grin, I'll play the part again so everyone will see me the way that I see them. Isn't that crazy? We all put on our churchy whatever and act like our lives are not a mess, and we walk in and we have the goal to think that as we look around that no one else is a mess like we are. Come on. If I'm a mess, I know other people are a mess too, because we're all just humans. Guess what? We yell at each other in the Campbell house. Guess what? My son went into a tirade of words that you only hear in New York cabs after he heard me say one in the garage one day. And I hadn't even hit my hand with a hammer when I said it. Come on. None of us are that holy or righteous. So why even make the pretense? As we happy plastic people under shiny plastic steeples, with walls around our weakness and smiles that hide our pain, but the invitation's open to every heart that's broken, maybe then we close the curtain on our stained glass masquerade. Is there anyone who's been there? Are there any hands raised? Am I the only one who's traded in the altar for a stage? The performance is convincing and we know every line by heart. Only when no one is watching can we really fall apart. But would it set me free if I dared to let you see the truth behind the person you imagine me to be? Or would your eyes be opened? Or would you walk away? Would the love of Jesus be enough to make you stay? So since we're all a mess anyways, how about here at Benchmark we be real about it? And how about when someone is vulnerable, we don't just rip them apart? After all, they're just acting like us anyways. And the Lord, He meets that person and He meets us exactly where they are and where we are.